Is everything all right? People talk or say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front.
Outside in the warm Miami air, Winchell turned to me.
What was your name again, kid?
It's still Heller. Nathan S.
I'm sorry.
Heller.
Aren't you gonna spell it?
Look, I don't want to be in your story.
Good, because you're not. You're Chicago, right?
Born and bred.
What do you make of that, in that cell back there?
You're New York. What do you make of it?
It's horseshit. I think that little bastard hit Cermak. I think he thinks he's dying from that stomach of his, and the mobsters probably promised to support his family back in Italy in return for him taking Tony out, and for his silence. What do you think?
I think you're right on the money. But if you print it, nobody will believe a word.
What's the guy to do? Bullshit they'll believe. Take it from me. Facts only bore 'em.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right. Me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm Rob casting from right here in the Robservatory. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode, What is it? Man, I'm not doing so well tonight, I have to say. Robservations episode number 1077 or something. It doesn't matter. It just is an ongoing thing. I was not Johnny on the spot with the switcher tonight. I apologize. I dropped my phone on a button and interrupted the White Devils trailer. Listen, if you want to see special SVOD preview of the White Devils, you can get the movie right now at whitedevilsthemovie.com. You can go there, and for the low price of $9.95, you can watch White Devils, which is getting a theatrical release, but more on that later. You can also still get True Noir, the Assassination of Anton Cermak. Two things you can judge me by. You know, when I talk mad shit about other people's stuff, I only feel I can do it because I have my own stuff out there that you can judge me by. And do your worst if you hate it, please. You can go to truenoir.co and get all 4.5 hours of True Noir, the Assassination of Anton Cermak, written by Mystery Writers of America Grandmaster Max Allan Collins, who was on our lovely show yesterday, the 5th anniversary show of Let's Get Physical Media. Great to have him and Dieter. So I can already see people getting their hackles up about the title of this episode. And, remember, when I come up with these topics, they're usually first and foremost about me. Like, I'm thinking about things that are about me. And so when I say, are you watching movies correctly? I'm really asking myself, am I watching movies correctly? But I figured since these are Robservations, I'm here to share them with you. And I had something interesting happen. So every bi-weekly, if you're a member of this channel, we have member chats where I hang out with you guys. And sometimes the chats last for 2 or 3 hours. We had a 5.5 hour member chat, mostly because Roberto Suarez wasn't there. Normally I limit people to 7 minutes, but, if we get in great conversations, who am I to limit what you have to say? And I don't, which is why it went on for 5.5 hours. But anyway, you get your money's worth, right? But there is one of the members of the channel who I'm always delighted by, named Modesty Cortez. And What's interesting about her is she's really incredibly intelligent. And, wait a minute. Did I say Modesty Cortez? It's Corto Maltese. It's Modesty Maltese is her name. But she's very intelligent, and can be uber geeky. She's had an incredible life. She's from Europe. She's very intelligent, probably older than me. And she's amazing to talk to, and I always enjoy her commentary. So somehow we started talking about The Godfather, and The Godfather is her favorite movie of all time. Godfather 1 and 2 and 3. She said the Godfather trilogy is her favorite. It is mine as well. My favorite films of all time are Godfather and Godfather 2. I have watched them into the double digits, high double digits. I don't know if I've hit 100, but high double digits. And they pass what we all know as the HBO test. If they're airing on HBO and you're clicking through, well, nowadays you select things to watch, so it's different. But if we are still in the broadcast era, if The Godfather was running on any broadcast television anywhere, I would watch it. And by the way, we are approaching the 35th anniversary of Godfather 3, which opened in 1990. So I thought, I know everything there is to know about The Godfather. You know, I've got the big Toshin Godfather family album. I've read the annotated Godfather. You know, I've read so much about The Godfather. I watched The Offer like 4 times. You know, you think, and I've seen the movie as many times as I can possibly even remember. So I thought that I pretty much knew everything about the Godfather franchise. You know, there's not much that I haven't mulled over. And you just think you know everything. Your favorite films, why wouldn't you? How could you possibly, is there anything more to even know or consider? And Modesty Maltese hits me with a question. And she asks, who is the Godfather in Godfather 3? And I have to tell you, I was floored by this. It never occurred to me. As a matter of fact, I don't think that I ever pondered that question ever. Like, I'd never thought about it in those kind of terms. And I had to stop and think. And I gave her my answer. Now, here was the thing. It's dangerous giving her an answer because, and I didn't think about this until after I'd said it, because she's so smart. And she knows a lot more than I do. She's much more well-traveled than I am. She's worked for the BBC as a correspondent long ago when the BBC still meant something. I mean, she is clearly a Renaissance woman and knows a lot of what she speaks. And if she's a fan of Game of Thrones, which she is, I mean, she has Stephen Colbert levels of knowledge of Lord of the Rings, but with Game of Thrones, I would not presume to debate her. And I had to stop and think. I'd never considered that question. And my answer, for those of you out there playing at home, who is the Godfather in Godfather 3? I said God himself. God, the actual God. That's right. Whether you believe in God or not, in this context, God exists, and God is the true Godfather of Godfather 3 because it is all about Michael Corleone seeking absolution. Your sins are terrible. And so that was my answer to her. And she stopped and she goes, that's a good answer. She liked that one. But then she said, you're wrong. I figured I was going to get that. And so she told me that who she truly believes is the Godfather in Godfather 3 is Connie, is Talia Shire. And she delivered a very convincing argument that I had to agree. You are correct. It is, in fact, Connie. Connie is, she calls the shots. She pulls the strings in Godfather 3. And I haven't stopped thinking about this. Now, I have not gone back, and because the thing is, I don't just jump in and watch Godfather 3. I got to go back to the beginning. And look, I'm kind of like a Lord of the Rings head that way. Like, I like Two Towers, and I love, Return of the King, but I can't sit there and I don't go, I'm going to watch Two Towers today. I have to go, I'm going to watch Lord of the Rings today. And in my mind, because I worked on the team making the special features for the extended versions of Lord of the Rings, the extended versions are the definitive versions for me. It's funny when people say that they like the theatrical versions, which I understand because that's the way people saw them the first time. I can't go back and watch the theatrical versions because I miss everything. I miss everything that's missing. Although there is an argument to be made, while I would say that Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers, the definitive versions of those movies, are the extended editions, I go back and forth on Return of the King. I go back and forth whether the extended version of Return of the King, because it's not just extended, it's like 25% longer. So anyway, but it really got me thinking. I know I should be pondering world peace, and I should be thinking about all the people that are less fortunate than we are, and people that are losing their lives and all that, but I can't help it. You know, I'm thinking about Godfather. If I'm not thinking about the Roman Empire, I'm thinking about Godfather. So, which is true, because Godfather, when you think about Godfather, you're de facto, it's sort of a proxy for thinking about the Roman Empire. I mean, you know how that goes. And they even bring up the Roman Empire when a plot against the emperor fails. But so I've been thinking about this a lot. And I realized that as many times as I've seen The Godfather, as much as I know about it, there was more to learn. And what Modesty Maltese was talking about was she brought in the idea of Sicily and what the whole culture of vendetta meant to Italy itself, specifically Sicily, and how vendetta is so much a part of the Godfather films, which I knew, but I didn't realize how, maybe I misconstrued how important vendetta is to the films. And I made the assumption, it was interesting because I've always assumed in my mind, and the reason that I said that Godfather 3, the Godfather in Godfather 3 is literally God, because if you know the films, if you haven't seen the Godfather movies, none of this is going to make any sense, which I apologize for. But so I've always believed that in the two Godfather movies, the whole point is that Michael Corleone is the innocent. He's been kept out of the family business by Vito in the hopes that one day he could take the Corleone family legitimate. And that was kind of his Vito never apologized to anybody for the business he chose. He came and made his bones in America, but even he had scruples. He wasn't going to sell drugs, that kind of thing. I mean, yes, women and gambling, those are vices you can get behind because you're only hurting yourself, theoretically, but you don't try and hurt other people. I know that seems silly when you're talking about a crime movie, but I understood it, even from the first time I saw The Godfather. But I always believed that the great tragedy of Michael Corleone is that Vito Corleone has both heart and cunning and ruthlessness. He has both. Michael did not have the heart that Vito had. And so when Fredo is killed, when he orders his own brother to die, I've always believed that that's when Michael loses his soul. And at the end of Godfather 2, when the camera pushes into him, in my mind, the way I always thought about it was that Michael Corleone is truly damned and that he will never recover. And that Godfather 3, even though he repents and confesses, it's not enough. And literally, God punishes him at the end of Godfather 3. And if you know the movie, you know what happens. And while, look, I'm one of these people that I understand Sofia Coppola was probably not the best choice to replace Winona Ryder. I get all of that. And I understand that the relationship between Andy Garcia and her is a little half-baked. And there's a lot of thoughts in the film. Modesty had some really interesting changes she would make to Godfather 3 that I thought were better too. But Godfather is what it is, and as one of the West Coast rappers said in The Sopranos, Godfather 3, it's just misunderstood. But I love the film, but then she told me that I was wrong, and I don't know if I agree with her. This is what I've been thinking about. She said that Michael Corleone truly becomes who he is after Apollonia dies in Italy, because that goes back to Sicily and vendetta. And so once that happened, he's fully into the family business. And I had to agree. I mean, when he kills Sollozzo and the police captain and Sterling Hayden, that was the beginning of his entry into the family business. I would say maybe even further when he guards his father. outside the hospital. That's when it begins. But he's truly in when he kills somebody. And then when the woman he loves dies. And I always thought too that one of the reasons he's attracted to Apollonia was because to him she represented sort of an innocence. But Modesty told me, and she's right about this, that Apollonia represents Sicily. And that once he falls in love with her and accepts her, and he does it very quickly, he realizes that he needed that. He needed to be consumed. He needed to understand Sicily holistically. And when he didn't truly understand Sicily until she's killed. And then he's all in. And I would say, I never thought of that. I still believe, though, that I'm right, that he might understand Sicily, but so did Vito. And then I asked her the question. I said, if Vito found out what Fredo did, would Vito have Fredo killed the same way that Michael did? And she said, yes. And I never thought that was true, but I can't stop thinking about whether she was right or wrong. I can't stop thinking about it. And I guess because I live in a privileged Western society that allows me to ponder these things and not have to worry about where I'm going to lay my head or what I'm going to eat, even though I have to worry about both of those things now. But it really got me thinking. It really got me thinking about how to read and look at movies, and it's something I've been thinking about my entire life. And even something like The Godfather, it surprises me when I come up against somebody or talk to somebody. I wouldn't say against them, but the fact that Modesty Maltese was able to say something. It's so funny because I don't know her name. But in my world, her name is Modesty Maltese. And if you know your European comics, you know where that comes from. Quarter Maltese and Modesty Blaze. But it's just, I've been thinking about the fact that even now, I can find new enjoyment in something I've loved so much that has defined for me my favorite art form. So anyway, let's table that for a minute, because that's going to lead, I wanted to explain where my thought process was coming at this subject. But I've got some letters I want to read, and then I have articles that I want to read and talk about. But yes, there's a lot of people have written me some letters, and I wanted to address them. So the first letter comes to me from Noah. And Noah Schur says, thanks for reading my last letter about Lego. As with the titles of my previous letters, I decided to just stick with my shtick of verisimilitude gimmicky titles for this letter and all future letters. And this title is To Boldly Vary Where No One Has Similituded Before. Since then, the Enterprise D Lego set has been officially revealed, and I think the designers absolutely nailed the model. Even the Shuttle Pod gift with purchase, if you buy it during the first few days of its launch, is dope as well. I can't wait to dive into the next generation after I finish the animated series. I finished the original series a few weeks ago and very much had fun with it. The generic space theme you mentioned having as a kid, generic space Legos, is now simply referred to as classic space. The good guys are the rainbow-colored space figures with the gray and blue space stations and vehicles, such as the iconic Galaxy Explorer. The bad guys are the all-black figures known as Blacktron with their red and blue vehicles. Hope this helps with your Lego space-themed terminology. And I saw some over the last week. I found out that in my town of Redlands, there is a store called Bricks and Minifigs, which I didn't know was there. It's been here for a year, and they had some of that classic space stuff on the counter behind the counter on the wall, where they've got a lot of finished Lego sets displayed. And I made me think of your letter. They have their own audience, and I'm one of them. So my main topic for this letter is more of a fun challenge that I will address momentarily. And for context, I grew up with the Kelvin Trek films. I know you vehemently dislike those movies, but that's okay. It is okay. They have their own audience, and I'm one of them. I tend to differ from my friends in that I enjoy movies they and many others consider to be bad. One of my most controversial takes is that I prefer Joker 2 over the first Joker. I am a Joker 2 apologist. I thought There was more to love and appreciate in the sequel, and I feel people are too focused on what they wanted it to be rather than accepting what it actually is. I agree 100%, and we get a lot of that in this space, if that makes sense. Finding the good in bad things helps me to be more positive, especially in the online fandom spaces where it seems to me that most people find enjoyment in hyperfixating on what they dislike 24/7. With all that being said, I'd like to challenge you to list at least 5 things about the Kelvin Trek films that you genuinely like and can appreciate despite your hatred toward them. This can be as simple as the casting of certain characters, an aspect of the production, or a particular scene. For example, one of my favorite moments in all of Star Trek is in the first Kelvin film when Pike dares Kirk to do better than his father, who captained his ship for about 6 to 8 minutes and still managed to save hundreds of crew members. That exchange was powerful and poignant for Kirk's character motivation. Anyway, thanks for reading another letter from me and for indulging in this fun thought experiment. Many regards, Noah. And then he included pictures of the Lego pod that is attached to the Lego Enterprise D. For the record, when I first saw pictures of the Lego Enterprise D, I wasn't that impressed. And it wasn't until I saw it built. I mean, obviously, there's the typo on the sticker that people talked about. Boldly was misspelled. But Lego, being that the Enterprise D is... it's all circular shapes. It was pretty impressive that they were able to pull that off and that they have a saucer separation. And after looking at the Lego Enterprise D and seeing it from different angles, I'm a big fan. I was very excited about seeing what they were able to do with it. I can't wait to see what Lego does with Legos, the franchise moving forward. But I have to say this. Let's go talk about the Kelvin films. I'll tell you things I like about them. You brought up the best scene in all 3 Kelvin movies, and that is when, after the bar fight that Kirk has with, first of all, Starfleet officers starting a bar fight because a townie is talking to Uhura is one of the dumbest fucking things ever in a movie that's full of 100,000 dumb things. That was really ridiculous. I mean, the problem that I had with Star Trek 09 is they're trying to make a movie set in the 20th century and slap Star Trek on it. Kirk rolling up on a motorcycle and seeing his future, seeing the Enterprise being built on the ground. I mean, look, I've said this a million times, but one of the interesting things about Starfleet design, 2 warp nacelles, a primary and secondary hull, is that they're not built in the gravity well of a planet. They're not built to function there. And if they were, I mean, gravity would not allow a structure like that to exist, even with all the inertial dampeners that you want. And the Kelvin timeline Enterprise is like fucking 4 times the size of the Enterprise from the original series. None of it makes any sense. It was really not well thought out, and I hated it. So, but you asked me to tell you good things. The scene with Pike and Kirk actually felt like it was taking place in the 23rd century, where it was supposed to take place. And Bruce Greenwood's performance, and I really do like Chris Pine as Kirk. I think that the actors that they cast in Star Trek 09 were great choices. Great choices. But they had to do strange things, like they bolstered Uhura's part. They gave Zoe Saldana more work to do, and they saddled her and Zachary Quinto, another actor who I've loved since his portrayal of Siler. I thought he was actually rather miscast in the role of Spock. I thought he played it way too mannered, and there is this thought that, and I don't understand it, that Vulcans don't have emotions. Well, Zachary Quinto was written to be way overly emotional, and I just didn't like the way the movie was written. I didn't like the way the characters were written, but the casting was incredible. Anton Yelchin was an amazing Chekhov, and then they saddle a real Russian speaker. They give him a weird accent, which to me broke the fourth wall and was so weird. But the late Anton Yelchin was great as Chekhov. When they ask him, there's a line, there's a bit of when he delivers his line and he realizes Vulcan is about to be destroyed, and he says, how long does Vulcan have or something? And you can hear in his performance that he's trying to come to grips with what's about to happen. And he's like, minutes. And there's something about just the way he said that. I'm like, oh my God, I totally believed it and felt the horror of the scene. I thought Eric Bana was a really great villain, again, written in just the dumbest villain in any major motion picture that you're supposed to take seriously. I mean, the man goes back in time, and he's mad that his homeworld is destroyed in the future, and he doesn't take his Borg technology in his ship and immediately make a beeline to Romulus and say, hey, in 100 years, the Hobus star is going to go supernova and destroy the homeworld. We can start fixing it now. He doesn't do that. He just stays angry about what happens 100 years in the future. It was just, I couldn't get past how dumb the movie was. But anyway, so I like the cast. I like the scene with Pike and Kirk. And I did like Simon Pegg as Scotty. I, of course, liked seeing Leonard Nimoy come back and play Spock. I liked Michael Giacchino's score. I think Enterprising Young Men is a great piece of Star Trek music. And the fifth thing I loved about Star Trek 09 was when it was over. So there you go. There's 5 things. And that comes to us from Noah. And Noah, I want to thank you for writing that letter. Now, to follow up, I'm going to read B Things' letter. B Things. Hi, Rob. This is a rather mundane question, but it's one I've never managed to find a satisfying answer for. And seeing as you are a knower of things, I thought I'd pose it to you. William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy's voices both sound markedly different in the Star Trek movies compared to how they sound in the original TV series or even the animated series. I've especially noticed this when I watch Star Trek the Motion Picture, but it's also noticeable in the subsequent films. This is just something to mark up the actor's aging, possibly mixed in with smoking, or were there developments in audio recording over the course of the 1970s that made them sound different? If it is the latter, then why don't DeForest Kelley, James Doohan sound as different? Still, in the animated series, Shatner and Nimoy sound like they did in TOS, and it feels odd to me that their voices could change so drastically in just 4 or 5 years. Like I said, I've never managed to find very informative explanations for this, and maybe I'm just being overly persnickety about it. It's just a thing that has stood out to me ever since I got into Star Trek nearly 20 years ago, before 2009, thankfully. By the way, that's what he wrote. I didn't editorialize there. And I figured I'd ask. Sorry for not having more philosophical letter this time. A more philosophical letter. Kapla. P.S. I didn't actually quite believe William Shatner was playing Kirk when I first saw Star Trek the Motion Picture, the DVD Director's Edition, due to a mix of him sounding different to me and, well, the hair. Since then, however, I've accepted that it is William Shatner. Also, I know you know this, but the motion picture is awesome. I wish there were more movies like it. And that comes to us from B Things. Well, I would say, first of all, a number of different things. There's always new advancements in recording technology, but I would say the approach to television and the approach to movie acting is probably the biggest difference. I mean, it's one thing to be acting in a TV series, moving as fast as you are moving when you're shooting a TV series. I know you think they sound like I found the performances, the audio performances in the animated series a little flat. Basically, because you have one of my problems with any kind of voiceover. In movies, it's not as pronounced, but a lot of the time, it's very difficult for me to watch Japanese animation dubbed because I don't buy any of the voice actors. It's gotten a lot better over the years, but one of the things that I wanted to do when I made True Noir as an audio drama is have an actor always acting against the people that were recording their parts. So I brought in an actor, Corey, who was always reading with my actors because I needed that performance. I needed performances. You can't just go into a booth and record and expect to get anything if you're not doing animation where people are. In my True Noir, I've got 10-minute scenes where people are acting with each other. You could never have done that in a booth with a single actor and made it work. You just can't do it. But I would say, and also Spock and Kirk in the motion picture are playing two very different versions of themselves. Spock has just failed. He's probably had the greatest failure of his life, not achieving Kolinar. And Kirk has been, he's not been out there, as McCoy says, hopping galaxies. He's been a desk jockey. And he's obsessed with getting the Enterprise back. So they're different people. And I think a lot of that it comes down to their performance. And you see glimmers of the old Jim Kirk in motion picture. Yes, it is. I mean, there's great moments in that movie. And by the time you get to the end of Star Trek the Motion Picture, you've got the band back together and people are in their rightful places. The family is back together. I mean, they played the same beats at the beginning of Wrath of Khan, which I understand, but I think that in Wrath of Khan, Shatner's back to playing Kirk the way he should be played. It's just that it's now middle-aged Kirk, so it's a little different. But that's just me. Your mileage may vary. So there is that, and let's see what. Okay, now this is a letter I promised to read. This comes from us from Darth Plato, the official historian of the Burnettwork, and Darth Plato had a bone to pick with Catherine Bigelow's House of Dynamite, now streaming on Netflix. I'm a big fan of Catherine Bigelow. I've been a big fan of hers ever since I saw the first movie she made. She co-directed that starred Willem Dafoe called The Loveless. And then, of course, Near Dark blew my mind. Blue Steel was a little bit, I don't know, lesser, but Strange Days is one of my favorite movies of the 90s. And huge fan of hers. But Darth Plato, well, take it away, Darth. Hey, Rob. This review of House of Dynamite, sadly, may come across as a Debbie Downer. Then again, if we're being honest, the entire subject matter is a Debbie Downer. However, I believe that the best approach to any critique is to start with the positives, or where there is agreement. The production is high and the actors were first rate. The first third of the movie felt like a quality watch, I agree. The movie drops off after the second and third retelling of that story. In the second part, I appreciated the scene where they were talking to the Russians. The scene scores high in foreshadowing the outcome, but is undermined by the cutaway endings. The third part was quite tiresome to watch, but the one scene that was expertly executed was the death of the Secretary of Defense, Reed Baker, played by Jared Harris. Reed has the only active decision in the entire movie, as well as the only moment of catharsis. Aristotle wrote that stories ought to have a beginning, middle, and end. Now, an implied ending can work. Off the top of my head, the final scene in The Long Good Friday comes to mind. Rob, I'm sure you can think of other examples. Now, my objection to the ending of House of Dynamite is not that we don't get to see Chicago get nuked. In itself, that would be superficial. My objection is that the movie is bad storytelling. Aristotle would probably say that the lack of resolution leaves the audience devoid of an emotional release or a catharsis. With the exception of Jared Harris's character, this is 100% true. Now, one might ask, can we really get a story with catharsis that involves nuclear annihilation? I like the mechanics of procedure shown in the movie, especially in the first third of the film. These scenes give the movie a high sense of mimesis. Mimesis? The act of creating realism. But sadly, it leads to poor verisimilitude, the effect of appearing real. House of Dynamite is an exercise of the process of storytelling rather than complete storytelling. Not only is there hardly any catharsis, there is no pivot or turning point, what Aristotle would call, let me see if I can get this one, peripetia? Peripetia? It's as if the writer-director merely wants to buffalo the audience into a thought experiment about nuclear Armageddon. That's fine as logical exercise, but it's not a substitute for good storytelling. I acknowledge that a story doesn't necessarily have to have one protagonist, but can a story have no antagonist? Can you imagine The Odyssey with no Cyclops? Or in His House Devoid of Suitors? That wouldn't be a story at all. The movie tries to overawe the viewer with subject matter, an impending nuclear strike on the U.S., and consequently the implied beginning of the nuclear holocaust as presaged by the scene with the Russians. The rise of the action, only to be cut out at the decisive moment, feels like Lucy with the football, pulling away, not once, not twice, but 3 times. I had girlfriends like that in high school. And the audience, by the way, that's me editorializing, and the audience is Charlie Brown. Repeating these same story elements can only lead to diminishing returns. Here is a movie where all of the characters are reacting and not acting. Again, Jared Harris being the only exception. Our character is shaped by our agency, not our reactions. Merely reacting doesn't reveal emotion or moral agency or build character. The only emotion we see is wallowing in helplessness, depression, surrendering to circumstance. The only character who even remotely shows any real rise in emotion of classic drama of old was Jared Harris. One technical point: if the U.S. wanted to nuke North Korea, you wouldn't see missiles launched from the American Midwest going over the North Pole and flying over Russia and China. That would trigger the conflagrating response. A nuke from the south, such as from a sub in the Sea of Japan or over Japan, would be enough. It's as if the writer-director is stuck in a 1962 freeze frame of what nuclear war might look like. The writer-director subverts the craft of storytelling to paint a picture or send a message of the horror of an impending nuclear strike as its consequence in the form of showing every character as utterly helpless to do anything except weep, hide, or commit suicide. There are much better movies that showcase impending nuclear war. Rob, you could enumerate them better than I could. Well, one of my favorites is Failsafe, which you should watch. Or, if one wanted to make a real-world drama, one could portray the Able Archer 83 incident or the Goldsboro incident, both of which I will have to look up. House of Dynamite adopts motifs about pre-World War I Europe into the plot of the movie. Even the play on words, House of Dynamite, mirrors the powder keg of Europe thesis, meaning that just as Europe was allegedly an armed camp awaiting the spark that would trigger the war to end all wars, so too our world today is sitting on stockpiles of nuclear weapons awaiting the end. This movie retells part of the false narrative of the main, M-A-I-N, argument about World War I, that the interlocking alliances predetermined that Europe would declare war, as if there was no thinking beforehand of what the other great powers and other actors were doing. It's a vulgar argument, by the way, full of vulgar presentism. Likewise, House of Dynamite portrays a world where the response is similarly predetermined, but even more fateful than what happened in 1914. I'll close with this thought. The entire plot of House of Dynamite is not an execution of a proper story at all, but rather it is a pedagogical exercise. Pedagogical exercise. It tries to send a message. If you want to tell a story, tell a story. But if you want to send a message, go work for the post office. Take care, Darth Plato. This is why I like doing this show, because I get letters like this, which is great. So there's a few letters, and now I want to jump in to the meat and potatoes of what this episode is really all about. I posed the question, do people really know how to watch movies? Do you know how to watch a movie? And when I say watch a movie, everybody can sit down and watch a movie. But like learning how to read, I've always believed that you can learn to read, but can you really be literate? And I saw something, this is part of the reason I wanted to do this show too. I saw something today, somebody made just a quick, I saw it on Reels on Instagram. Somebody pointed out that when The Simpsons, which is now 30 plus years old, when The Simpsons originally came out, the writers of The Simpsons and Matt Groening coming out from doing his comic like Life in Hell, Matt Groening went to a college I went to, the Evergreen State College. When Matt Groening came out and his writers were writing The Simpsons back in the day, they were referencing all kinds of things. They were referencing art. They were referencing pop culture. They were referencing what was going on at the time. And this quick video made the point that now, 30 years later, the writers of The Simpsons are writing what they learned growing up watching The Simpsons. And it made me, I totally agree with that. And I feel that the people that are writing Star Trek, the people that originally wrote Star Trek, you had a lot of the great fantasists of the day that were authors, playwrights. They were writing short stories, playwrights. They were writing short stories, plays, novels, and screenplays. So you had these consummate writers that were men and women of letters that were pretty highly educated, and they were coming off of the Great Depression and World War II and the Korean War, and living through the rise of the American middle class. So they themselves, as writers, had a lot to say. Nowadays, my big objection to Star Trek is the people that are writing Star Trek are children of the media, and all they really have to say is revisions or ruminations on what Joss Whedon did in Firefly, Buffy, and Angel. Hence, a musical episode where the Klingons in the musical episode become a boy band from 20th century or 21st century Earth instead of singing Klingon opera. First of all, the fact that they're a boy band at all, I mean, there is no verisimilitude in modern Star Trek because the writers are only referencing other things that they've seen. Now, people have always done that through their art. However, art is really only as good as what you put into it. And I would say that we used to have writers that were much more well-rounded in terms of classical education and also life experience. You know, it was just a different world. And when you've spent most of your time consuming media that other people wrote from different eras, by the time you get to contribute, you're sort of 3 steps removed from actual original thought. And I don't blame anybody for that, but it's something that has certainly affected our genre entertainment. And you can look at Star Wars for the same kind of thing. When George Lucas made Star Wars, everyone knows he was thinking about Joseph Campbell, the writings of Joseph Campbell. He was thinking about the movies of Kurosawa, a lot of different things that he was. And the movies of Kurosawa are not just the movies he made, but you're talking about movies from a Japanese culture. You're talking about the way of the Bushido. You're talking about things of honor and religion. And there was all of these things that played into Lucas's conception of what Star Wars became. But now, the people that are making Star Wars are referencing Star Wars. What they're not doing is going outside of Star Wars and finding other things to extrapolate. It's like when George R.R. Martin wrote Game of Thrones. He was thinking about things like the actual War of the Roses. No, not the movie starring Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas. The actual War of the Roses. And, of course, even that title was a reference to the actual historical War of the Roses, which today it's very apparent that the people that are writing a lot of our genre material are not looking outward to the real world. They're referencing other movies. And that was actually a problem even when I was in film school back in the late 80s. Everybody wanted to be Quentin Tarantino, and they were referencing other movies. Just nobody was doing it as well as Tarantino did because they hadn't seen as many movies. So anyway, I was thinking about this combined with the conversation I had with Modesty Maltese about The Godfather. And I realized that there was more to learn, and that if I delved, it made me want to go delve into Sicilian culture, specifically the idea of vendetta, and see what I was missing and what could I find. And she even told me about a book that Godfather 3 that was based on, that I believe was written in 1982, and told me a whole thing about this person that was hired by the Catholic Church to investigate the murder of John Paul II. And that was what Puzo and Coppola leaned on heavily. And obviously it's there, but knowing something about, like, you know, knowing that Johnny Fontaine's supposed to be Frank Sinatra, or that Alex Rocco's character, Mo Green, is supposed to be Bugsy Siegel. The movie means more and is more resonant if you know these things. Now, anybody can watch The Godfather and get up and go, that was good. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the more you know, the more things, the more the references, I mean, art, knowing those references. I love going to museums, but I'll tell you something. I know going to museums, it's the great shame of my life. I mean, I'm the guy that sits there and I want to read everything. You know, all the plaques on the walls or the explanations of everything. I go to museums and I realize, boy, I really wish I grew up going to the great museums of, I've never been to Florence. I don't think you can be a fan of art and not have gone to Florence. At least that's what I've been told. And I wish I have gone there. I've never gone to Florence. I've never been to Italy. I've met a lot of Italian girls and I've eaten a lot of Italian food, but I've never actually been to Italy. And I don't think you can really know a place until you've actually been there. So anyway, I'm going to read a few articles, and I hope they're not triggering for some people, but I find it very disconcerting that the literacy rates, especially in this country, are plummeting. And the more I read, I've dealt with some of these stories here on the show, but the more I read, it is disturbing, especially when you're watching in real time people opining on the world order with very little understanding of what they're opining about. I mean, we have Google, and nobody bothers to a cursory Google search and, reading a few opposing viewpoints, trying to figure out what your point of view is rather than being told what your point of view should be. But anyway, here's an article that comes to us from Forbes. And this was written by Nancy Doyle, and it came out January 23rd, 2024. Is literacy becoming obsolete? The assistive technology revolution is in full swing. In the late 20th century, computer-assisted reading and writing developed a foothold in the disability community. People with sensory and motor disabilities became able to read and consume literature via speech-to-text and text-to-speech packages, which adapted their standard software. Dyslexic and ADHD people also found that the technology enabled faster processing, which eased the transfer of information into the memory, improving overall comprehension and learning. Fast forward to 2024, and we have nothing short of a revolution. Such technologies are embedded into everyday life via our mobile phones, laptops, and reading tablets, and even eyeglasses. In the workplace, assistive technology is frequently prescribed as a disability adjustment or accommodation. Listening to emails out loud or dictating the return email is useful for a wide range of conditions like those mentioned above, but also anyone with chronic fatigue or living with pain. Coupled with ever more sophisticated predictive texts and spell checkers, what level of literacy knowledge is currently needed for a 20th century workforce? For the 20th, that should have been 21st century workforce. The arrival of the printing press dates back over 1,000 years. From primitive metal structures in Korea, wooden blocks in China, to goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg in 1436 in Germany. However, the Industrial Revolution brought a steam-powered press, and along with the expansion of cities, factory work and public education created a sea change in the way humans communicated. From oral traditions, poetry, theater, and song to textbooks, newspapers, and pamphlets in a few generations. Those who couldn't read became disabled, and their ability to develop their careers even in jobs which didn't require reading for delivery, such as construction, nursing, and storytelling, became inaccessible to the illiterate. Yet as our technologies progressed to the ubiquitous video reels of social media, e-learning, and live video lectures, are we evolving past our dependency on literacy as a form of mass communication and media? Perhaps literacy is becoming an option of communication rather than essential. Such a change would liberate those who are highly talented in visual, spatial, verbal forms of communication, but struggle with the 2D sequencing of complex texts. It provides access to advanced scholarship, which is currently behind the grammar and spelling paywall. So, if our workforce is transitioning to paperless offices and video call briefings, our schools need to consider how we are preparing the next generation. The current UK policies prioritize advanced grammar, joined-up handwriting, and harsh penalties for spelling errors. Those are out of step with future society today's children will join. Schools need to get competent at augmenting learning with assistive technology to prevent children from falling behind on developing their critical thinking and creativity skills due to a 2D processing issue, which is now easily surmountable. Assistive technology experts Microlink have teamed up with HSBC to deliver a program called Be That Teacher, which provides basic training for teachers by teachers in technology, which is often available for free as part of everyday word processing and mobile phones. Be That Teacher. Program director Nick Ponsford said, "Technology is the equalizer for our time. As the digital revolution continues, schools need to provide inclusive teaching and learning practices for all students that not only utilize new technologies for our learners today, but for their future needs too. This fully funded Be That Teacher program is a joyous celebration of ed tech and the universal model of design, meaning classrooms and curriculums can easily be personalized for students and their cognitive, physical, and emotional needs at the push of a button. I'm proud to be leading this, and thank you to HSBC. Participating teachers and leaders have nothing but praise for this education initiative. Chris Eiling from Warren Park School in Hampshire said, "The microlink at training has formed the way we look at inclusive teaching and learning. Developing our understanding and awareness of assistive technology has enabled us to maximize the way we can open up our curriculum for all children. The at training provided valuable insights into the transformative nature of assistive technology, enabling personalized learning experience for all students in our classrooms, not just those with recognized needs, and I'm genuinely enthusiastic about the immense possibilities at has to offer, extending far beyond confines of the classroom." The Be That Teacher combined initiative heralds better collaboration between businesses and schools, essential for preparing us for the future of work, which will be AI-rich and data-driven. We need a workforce which can concentrate on making meaningful insights, understanding patterns and trends, not stuck at one stage because one can't hold a pen easily or focus on a screen. So anyway, I don't need to read more of this. I hope you got what I got when I read this article. This is basically, it's couched in an article that's talking about literacy and then becomes an ad for assistive technology. I was mad when I read this because I was looking for something interesting to read. And by the time I got to this, I'm like, I get it. I understand about assistive technology. I understand how great, I use it all the time. But we are finding out that assistive technology is being used all over the place in place of understanding what that assistive technology actually is. You hear stories all the time about students handing in ChatGPT or other large language model generated papers that were not actually written at all by the students. In fact, some teachers will tell you that the students didn't even read the papers. And I find that shocking. And what I see happening, and what bothers me so much, is just by the idea of going back to the people that are writing The Simpsons, they grew up only watching The Simpsons, and so they don't have anything other than The Simpsons to base future Simpsons episodes on. And if that happens to our entire culture, and it goes into just one big giant feedback loop, it'll be like AI hallucinations. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse through time. And where's the thought? Where will be the new thoughts that are generated? And the great thing about human existence is, as we move through the world, as we have more technology, there are new challenges to face, intellectual challenges on a daily basis. For instance, the ethics. I mean, there's people talking about AI ethics, but the ethics, I would ask, I never see anybody talking about the ethics of using ChatGPT to help you write a paper. I mean, some people address it, but as a student and as a teacher, if I was ever a teacher, I would say you can't use ChatGPT. I mean, not in my class, because the whole purpose is I want to know what you think. I mean, I'm as if I had a class. I don't. But if I had a class, the whole point of writing and the whole point of reading it is to train your mind to think. And the whole purpose of writing, the reason you write essays, is to learn how to organize your thoughts. I still think about writing a 5-paragraph essay. You have your thesis paragraph, you have your 3 paragraphs proving your thesis, and then your concluding paragraph. I think about that all the time. I learned that in 6th grade? And the whole purpose of that structure is to teach you how to think. And by having to use language and writing, you're opening up your brain to learn how to process information and how to organize it. And then so you can think back to yourself, well, what do I believe? And I think one of the things that we're seeing as a result of our social media space is there isn't that contemplative. People are just watching things and they're accepting them as fact without ever stopping and going, and not just facts and figures about I'm talking about ideological things that people should wonder, is this right or wrong? But when you see it on a screen, you just accept it as being truth. And there's a lot of various things going on in the world today where people have just accepted a lot of what they consider to be truth without considering any of the ramifications of it. They just accept and they incorporate that into their worldview. Well, what does that mean in terms of entertainment? Well, we were talking about this today on Versus. The Angry Badger and I, we didn't get into an argument, but I said to him, I said, look, the more you know going into anything, whether it's a novel, a play, a symphony, the more you know about it, the more you can enjoy it. If you don't know anything about something and you can sit down, you can watch it on a certain level. You can experience it on a certain level. And you can either like it or dislike it. But you're probably missing the whole thing. You're probably getting maybe 5% of what's actually being presented to you. And one of the great frustrations in my own life has been to know when I'm watching something that I don't know enough about. It makes me, I'll go back and I'll read things. You know, I'll give you an example. The Ride of the Valkyries, you know, dun 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 dun, which I knew from Apocalypse Now. So many pieces of classical music I heard in movies have led me to the composers, and then you go read about the composers. And then suddenly, you can enjoy music. You can enjoy classical music for its own sake. And I do believe that classical music, especially when you have like somebody like Beethoven, who we also talked about on the member chat, there is something in the structure of music that actually interacts. There are things that I think that we've evolved as human beings to have that we don't touch upon very much. And I think our relation to sound is one of those things. People would say like, well, we know when an animal growls to run. We know those things. But I think also there are other sounds, like if you put your fingertip on a glass and rub the top of the glass, we have a response to that sound. Fingers on a chalkboard. There's all kinds of sounds, resonant noises that we're hardwired biologically to respond to. But anybody who has a cursory glance at any video where somebody's playing music to animals and you watch animals walk over and respond to music, that sound itself, melodic sound, music that only could have existed. It comes out of, in nature, you have many different whale song, the song of birds, clearly melodic and resonant frequencies, the kind of which you find in music, has some kind of effect on the life on this planet, rightly or wrongly. And when we started creating, humanity started creating its own music and symphonies, like I don't know much about, I've never looked into when was the first symphony. When did two people sit down with different instruments and play together? You know, what was that like? Can you imagine the first person who's like beating on a drum and somebody's blowing through an antler of something, and then the percussionist got together with the horn player back in the cave, you know, over the storytelling when the fires were burning and you're eating the spoils of that day's hunt, and two guys or two girls or whoever got together and started putting their sounds together and created the first band. What must that have been like? It happened for the very first time at some point. Boy, I would love to have been there when that happened. I would love to have been there and have not ever heard two people play an instrument together in tandem. Freeform jazz, if you will. What would that have been like? How mind-blowing would that have been if you were there at that moment? I feel that way about a lot of things. You know, I talked about James Burke's show Connections that Chip Wall showed us, and we would watch in school, in junior high school. I started watching James Burke's Connections, and it would start out talking about irrigation in ancient Rome and end with the atomic bomb, and it would take you on that journey. As a kid, I couldn't get enough of that. But anyway, literacy. Literacy is the beginning of understanding. First of all, anybody can be told a story, but you have to learn language first. You have to learn how to speak the same language. And what language does, once you learn language, I mean, can you imagine before people talked and all you had was grunting and you didn't have words for things? Everybody was just pointing. All you had was visual language, the visual language of the world. Imagine what that was like. What was it like to run and to watch the outside world run when you're running fast, and how people started to realize the world looked different at speed than it does when you're standing still. And imagine what that was like, making those revelations. I mean, that was the first time that man probably stopped and looked around and said, it's interesting if I stand here, or since we have a fixed focal length, imagine what happened when man went up high and looked over the first vista of the valley down below. Now imagine what that was like, not just to see, but what it made somebody feel, to be up high and to look down, and your perspective changes. You're like, oh yeah, there's our cave right down there. What was that like? And then suddenly you're thinking differently. People probably had lots of things like, we can get up those assholes from the other village that are trying to steal our water. If we get up higher, we can see them coming. I mean, imagine what sight did to people and how we started to learn and how we incorporated that into our worldview. It must have been astonishing. And once you started to realize, getting up higher, the idea of getting higher at a vantage point is now something, it's a skill you've now learned that you didn't know before. The same is true of consuming stories. The more you know about the background, and the same is true of now we come to the language, because until you have language, you can't quantify, two people don't know what each other is thinking, but when you have the same language, you can convey ideas to one another and somebody can understand what you mean. That is the beginning of civilization, true civilization. Well, if you understand that language begins that way, everything has a language. Music has a language. Dance has a language. Sculpture, painting has a language. And so too does our favorite art form, perhaps the greatest art form of the 20th century, but maybe ever, which was cinema, at least at the time. Cinema was an art form that did not exist 200 years ago. The technology didn't exist. The thought didn't exist. There was no way to have cinema because we just didn't have the technology. Cinema takes all the other human artistic endeavors and combines them with technology. We didn't get the first feature till the beginning of the 20th century, the first feature-length motion picture. And imagine that, the evolution of cinema, especially the first, since the 1880s, and the evolution of cinema up to the sound era is fascinating, going from the 1880s up to 1927. If you look at that and you see, imagine what it was like. Human beings had no way to watch moving images of human life up until the 1880s. Imagine what that was like. You hear stories about the first people watching just a video of just a movie of a train coming into the station, even though it was black and white and it had a wacky frame rate. No one had ever seen that before. I mean, and that was not that far away from where we are now. So over the course of the creation of the first 30 or 40 years of cinema, a new language that never existed before on planet Earth, the language of cinema, came into being. And that language was developing. People didn't know what it was. And I think the greatest single piece of the cinematic language was montage, was editing. And it was really first defined by a Russian named Sergei Eisenstein. And it was incredible. And he has a book called Sculpting in Time that you have to read in film school. But he talks about the levels of montage. But the next article that I wanted to read was about cinematic language. And this article is learning to speak the cinematic language. And this comes from the Circe Institute, whatever that is, Cultivating Wisdom and Virtue. Look, man, I can't tell you where I come across all this stuff. I just do cursory Google searches. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. And find this stuff, and I love finding it for you guys. I love finding it for myself. This was written and published by Brett McCracken, January 31st, 2011. at the Circe Institute, whatever that is. I'm often asked, does being a film critic ruin the pleasure of watching movies for you? Are you so focused on analyzing or deconstructing a film while you're watching it that you can't simply enjoy it? I answer them, no. I enjoy movies because I approach them critically, analytically. I enjoy movies all the more because rather than turning my brain off while I watch them, I turn my brain on even more, looking for the details and nuances and patterns that make any perceived experience of beauty all the richer. Or rather, I turn on my brain in a way that is simply more perceptive and open, eager to pick up and appreciate things because I've learned to be a lover of the language of cinema. Learning the language of cinema starts with a deep consideration of the form itself. What is a movie? How is the medium different from theater, literature, photography? What are cinema's unique abilities and potentials? When you start asking this question, you'll soon come to contemplate a fact which you already intuitively know. Cinema has a unique relationship to reality and time. It has the ability to manipulate, condense, and elongate time so that we can experience the whole lifetime of a character for decades of narrative history in the span of a couple of hours. Theorist and filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky called filmmaking sculpting in time. I was mixing up Eisenstein and Tarkovsky. Sculpting in time is Tarkovsky. The levels of montage is Eisenstein. Theorist and filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky called filmmaking sculpting in time and wrote, I think that when a person normally goes to the cinema, for is time, for time lost or spent or not yet had. He goes there for living experience, for cinema, like no other art, widens, enhances, and concentrates a person's experience. Part of sculpting in time is the art of editing or montage, the putting together of fragments of captured time and observed reality, scenes and shots, to the end of creating meaning. Why are certain shots juxtaposed to one another or put together in a sequence? Perhaps it's meant to evoke paranoia and stress, as in Black Swan, or a hallucinatory mirage, like in 127 Hours, or the elemental beauty of passion, and in the infamous bee pollination love scene in I Am Love. Sometimes one cut or one montage sequence can be so jarring, the entire movie hinges on it. There is still an abrupt cut in Never Let Me Go, a beautiful film, by the way, directed by Mark Romanek. It's an adaptation of the book that still haunts me. A cut that captures the completion of one of the main characters in brutally sudden fashion. By the way, if you've seen Never Let Me Go, it is an unbelievably beautiful film. It's also a very unlikely science fiction film, one of my favorite science fiction films of the 21st century, even though it doesn't overtly seem like it is a science fiction movie. And it's got Charlotte Rampling in it, which makes it even better. And it has an incredible music score, which I guarantee you, as soon as you watch the movie, you will go out and buy the score. If you've never seen Never Let Me Go, it's one of Mark Romanek's 2 features. Please go buy it and watch it. Another aspect of the language of cinema has to do with the concept of what is sometimes called the camera's gaze. What is a camera looking at it? And how is it looking at it? This includes the various ways that camera draws attention to itself. It zooms, it pans, it lingers on static takes, close-ups, etc. Directors often hope that the camera is invisible and objective, even while they use its various functions to focus our attention here and there, subjectively choosing objects and faces to showcase. But I don't think it's such a bad thing to be aware of the camera while you're watching a film. Sofia Coppola's new film, Somewhere, for example, is full of noticeably long takes, of characters sitting together on a couch or lounging at the pool, of a desert racetrack with a sports car periodically zooming through the frame. There's even a painstakingly long, slow zoom in on the main character, played by Stephen Dorff, with a plaster mold mask on his face. Why? What's the point of all these long takes and the film's resultant slow pace? A viewing of somewhere that doesn't try to understand the rationale for its stylistic choices would likely result in frustration and boredom. But thoughtful consideration of the film's unique cinematic language, slow, observant, probing, unrushed, might lead one to see Coppola's film as an intentional upending of the typically fast-paced, ephemeral, glitzy Hollywood style. Rather, it's an un-Hollywood examination of Hollywood, exposing, through its luxuriant long-take language, the unseen and quiet moments of a celebrity's life outside the spotlight. Another tool in the linguistic palette of cinema is the movement of the camera itself. In this way, the camera can mimic a human observer, as a seeing eye that moves through a scene or surveys various angles of it, but it can also provide glimpses and angles and subjective emphasis that human observations might miss. In movies like Children of Men or the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice, for example, there are sequences of long, uninterrupted shots in which the camera effortlessly moves through complicated and vast spaces. Are these just cool, showy technical achievements? Yes, but they also serve a purpose. They emphasize the scope of space by exploring it, and they highlight the chaos and complexity of a variety of interlocking characters and plot points in one fell swoop. In addition to editing, camera movement, and shot length, the language of cinema also includes things like mise-en-scène, the composition of elements within the frame, lighting, sound, set design, costumes, makeup, effects, and dozens of other artistic elements that each can be employed in specific ways to communicate something about the film. All these elements comprise the letters in the language of cinema, and to understand the pieces is to better understand how they work together as a whole. It then becomes easier and more thrilling to analyze complicated films or particularly challenging scenes within them, such as the regatta scene with the Winklevoss twins in The Social Network. What was going on in this scene? On one hand, there's the plot thematic significance. The Winklevoss twins lose by just that much in the rowing of the race, just as they do to Mark Zuckerberg in the Facebook race. But then there are the stylistic details, like the Trent Reznor contorted version of Griegs in the Hall of the Mountain King. Dun, 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 dun. That was not written down. An ominous perversion of a romantic classic. And what's up with the tilt-shift cinematography that makes everything look miniature? Why are the spectators in the stands wearing Victorian-era boater hats? Why is this 90-second interlude so stylistically different than the rest of the film? Being conversant in the language of cinema allows one to see how formal details of this scene work together and to what end. It's a turning point scene meant to encapsulate the film's changing of the guard motif, the upending of traditional privilege class, the fast-moving remixing of power structures, and the transition from a spectator-performer bifurcation to a more flattened space of interactivity. In addition to being a useful help in the understanding of particular scenes in movies, learning how to speak the language of cinema also allows one to better the patterns of style that define a certain filmmaker's body of work. It helps us to recognize a certain combination of shots or favored camera angles as being the signature of a certain director. We're able to watch any 5-minute stretch of The New World and recognize, oh yeah, that's a Terrence Malick film. Or turn on The Social Network and recognize in the first shot that it is indeed a David Fincher film. In the same way that studying art history allows one to peruse a museum and recognize a stellar example of abstract expressionism from a middling one, or to delineate a Picasso masterpiece from a minor Monet, cultivating a proficiency in the language of cinema helps one to become a better connoisseur. By the way, I know. There's a reason I have found this article. Helps one to become a better connoisseur of the cinematic art form. It helps us to more thoroughly appreciate the very best of films and discover the thrill of truly understanding what a film is and can be. I thought that was a pretty good encapsulation of the entire experience of going to film school. But anyway, one of the things that I thought was absolutely correct about this article is the more you know about these things, the more you think about these things, the better you can appreciate movies. And the thing is, I've told people a lot on this show over the last 7 years that I've done this show I've told people that there are some movies nowadays that modern audiences just can't watch. Now, I don't even mean they can. You can sit down and watch anything, but these are movies that I have challenged people, and a few people have taken me up on the challenge, like Major Chai Chai. There are movies that people used to go to all the time, and I have challenged people who watch this channel to try and sit down and watch them all the way through. And it's rough. They're just movies. But I challenge people to watch them. And I'll give you a few. I'll give you 2 movies that are, in fact, genre films. And one is of course, Andrei Tarkovsky's. I'll give you the hardest one. Stalker. Stalker is I believe it was 70s. Was it late 70s? Maybe early 80s. I think 70 was 79. Stalker is a science fiction movie that is based on Arkady and Boris Strugatsky's book Roadside Picnic. And so it's a science fiction movie, but if you've never seen a Tarkovsky movie, it's okay. But I'm challenging for all those people that are saying, "Oh, come on, Rob, don't be pretentious." I'm telling you, you have to know how to watch a Tarkovsky movie. It is not, you don't just sit down. I don't think people can. I defy anyone to sit down and watch that Tarkovsky movie without prepping yourself and knowing what you're getting into. I bet many of you will not be able to make it to the end. Some will, and get back to me on it. But that is one. The other is a movie called Last Year at Marienbad. A wonderful movie. The photography alone is ensorceling. But I would, anybody, and I would ask you, when you sit down, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to try and watch Stalker and go, "I hated that." And I would say the reason that you hated it is because you haven't learned how to watch it yet. And I'm not trying to be pretentious. I'm just saying it's true. And how do I know that? Because I didn't. I didn't know how to watch it. And the first time I saw Stalker, let's just say I wasn't as enamored of it as I wanted to be. Now, I had seen other Tarkovsky movies. I had seen Nostalgia. I had seen Solaris. I had seen Andrei Rublev. But Stalker was a different thing entirely. And one of the things that I learned, and how did I learn to watch movies that aren't from, actually I would say this was something that's mostly about films that don't come from the United States, that don't come from the Hollywood tradition. When I was growing up, I was lucky that I had the Seattle International Film Festival to go to. And in the month of May and June, I would see, in the space of a month, I'd get a full series pass, and I would see 150 to 200 movies. Now, a lot of these films were from around the world, and I quickly learned, and we're talking, I first went to my first Seattle Film Festival movie was actually Empire Strikes Back, 1980. But then when I got a full series pass, I started seeing all these movies, and there were a lot that I thought were fucking boring as fuck, and I could barely get through them. And I would actually physically feel some of them made me, I wouldn't say ill, but just annoyed me. Would that be the right word? And I had to learn to train myself. And I had to learn to let go of my expectations of American cinema. And I had to retrain. I mean, you take it for granted. You start watching movies when you're a kid. How hard can it be? It's fun to watch movies when you're a kid. But I had to retrain myself and learn how to watch movies over again, because the pacing and the movies that I loved were very different than a lot of these movies. If I'm watching, some day in the life film that takes place in Bangladesh, it could be a little rough. And so it took me years, by the way, to train myself, mostly going to the Seattle Film Festival. I had these yearly experiences for about 8 years when I went and saw all these crazy movies until I moved away from Seattle. And now the Seattle Film Festival has become so goddamn pretentious. It's just, I can't even, it's just, although I did finally get to have a movie that I produced go there in 2009, The Hills Run Red. but I was told it was the worst movie of the festival. But that's another story that I've told before. But I had to learn. I had to learn. You have to unlearn what you have learned. Somebody I know once said that. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing. Now, I have one more article to read about this, but I want to jump in and see what you guys are saying. There's a lot of people firing in super chats and things. Let's see. It's Us, Rob, says, hello again, Rob. Another member of the PGS who's hot, but not too hot, just as you've requested, has arrived to give you your daily blowjob. Also, Dieter is flying in to bring you his entire physical media collection. Then he'll give you a foot massage, as you've demanded he do so. Let us know how else we can keep you happy. Well, just being here. I mean, watching the show. I appreciate that. But by the way, you know what would make me happy? If more people, there's a lot of people who are channel members, which I appreciate, that have never come to the member chats. And I've often been curious, and there's a lot of people who come to the member chats that have never, you don't have to show yourself. You don't have to you don't have to show up. You can come to the member chats, you can interact in the chat, but you don't have to show your face. The fun part for me of the member chats and why I like it so much is I get to talk to all of you and people that I very much appreciate, people becoming members of the channel. I freely admit that there is a monetary part of this that has allowed me to stabilize my income, which has allowed me to do things like True Noir or try and get White Devils out there. And I very much appreciate the people who support the channel. So it's nice to hang out and meet people, see what they have to say. And plus, I have to say that the members of this, not that everybody watching, you don't have to be members, but I mean the members are a bunch of really interesting people. And some have come and gone, and I remember the people, there were members that showed up all the time that haven't come back in a long time. And I think first and foremost, are they okay? So it is us, Rob. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. How you keep me happy? Just keep participating. Be a great audience. I think I have the best audience on YouTube. Julian M. says, Rob, Saturday, we strayed into theories about Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. After Empire Strikes Back, I thought Graham Revell's voice as Palpatine sounded very like Alec Guinness, which led me to wonder if the two of them were clones. I still feel that might have made a better backstory. That's very interesting. I talked to people how when after Star Wars came out, which changed the landscape of everything, there were a lot of science fiction film magazines and fan magazines that had come out, like magazines like Fantastic Films, which is kind of like a cross between Cinefantastique and Starlog. But there were so many theories in those magazines, and people thought the name Obi-Wan was actually OB1. And that was a clone designation. That was like his clone number, because people, keyed on the term the Clone Wars, and those were heady days, my friends. So Julian, Graham Revell's voice as Palpatine sounded like Alec Guinness. Interesting. I like that. 1001 Johnny says, Gee, Rob, I didn't really ask about that 3-hour conversation you had about Ultraman Blazer. I'm sad to have already forgotten the gentleman's name who started watching Blazer. That's Alvaro. Please correct me. Alvaro Zinus Amaro. But what was the main takeaway from his dialogue with you? But all the same, I must not forget Ultraman episodes 10 and 14, the mysterious dinosaur base and the Pearl Defense. Episode 20, the monster is a giant shooting star in space. Ultraman Omega episode 2, the alien, the scholar, and I. Well, basically, Alvaro and I were talking about the form of Ultraman, the forms of the stories that are being told, and how does that all work, and in relation to that genre of Japanese science fiction. And it was pretty interesting. Let's see. This one is Ride Thasno. Ride that. Am I missing that? Ride the snow. Ride the snow. They celebrate 35 months of membership. It gives me pleasure to support Bob financially. Sending my best to you all. Together we are one. Now bring out the GIMP. You can't go wrong with a Pulp Fiction reference. You cannot go wrong. Secular Monk says, if humanity becomes too reliant on AT, then we're all doomed. As a teacher, AT is great. It doesn't substitute for the genuine learning that requires actual human thought and effort. Well, that's the problem, is it's replacing human thought and effort. And that is the scary part about it. Secular Monk also goes in to say, you learn nothing if you let the computer do it. I mean, yeah, it's, to me, ChatGPT is like, it's like just giving the answer to a math problem. You know, you have to show that you know how to prove the theorem or prove the problem and answer the question through using actual math skills. And if you don't have those skills, what are you going to do? I like isolating movies that make you think about yourself. Oh, I like isolating movies that make you think about yourself. If you read, I prefer what I think and know and make sense. If you read, I prefer to what I think and know and make sense of. Wait, hang on a second. Let me read this again. I like isolating movies that make you think about yourself. If you read, I prefer to what I think and know and make sense of it, not to be given it. I think I got that one right. Fearless Wolf, who I have a letter from, and I will be reading it shortly. Rob, do you think young writers sliding into that Joss Whedon style is something we did to ourselves? Political cuts, gutted arts. In Scotland, we learned storytelling through the third man, and that grounding's gone. Yeah, no, I do. Look, here's what I find so strange about our world is that it seems to me when education came about teaching for the test and everybody was looking at numerical results so they could look at them on a spreadsheet, they wanted to be able to quantify education down into a way that they could then justify the monetization of education. Like once you can look at it on a spreadsheet, okay, our students are doing well in these things. But what's strange about that is the metric that they wanted to use, teaching for the test and having numerical scores to understand where we were in terms of education, have all shown that our educational system has tanked. It's tanked because you can't just teach for a test. You know, learning how to think deeply and conceptual thinking, how do you judge that? I mean, I think that holistically as a person, I was lucky. I grew up in a place called Mercer Island, Washington, that now I could never afford to live on. But it was a great public school system, and we had great teachers. And even though it was public, people were very well-heeled on Mercer Island, way more well-heeled now. The house I grew up in, which my parents bought for $30,000, would cost over $2 million today. The same house, it still looks the same. But anyway, it was a great public school system, and we had great teachers. And there were a lot of after-school projects. There was a lot of after-school clubs. I was the feature editor of my high school newspaper. You could join drama club. We had very robust sports programs. There were science clubs. I worked on the high school newspaper. We even, at the time, there were no computers. We would have to paste up our own newspaper. We'd have to drive out to the U District and paste up our own newspapers. And literally, we'd have the typesetter give us the stories, and we'd use the chart pack tape or whatever to put the lines around it, and then they'd print the paper. I mean, it was wild. And you think about that now, even the idea of laying out a page and then having to use tape and put it up, which is like an art project, is teaching you things. And it's so bizarre that this idea that we're going to teach for the test, or that we have Common Core math, which I don't even get that, but okay, is bizarre to me that we don't like art courses. I'll tell you something that I saw that was really interesting. So Elizabeth, my significant other, is a professor at La Sierra College, and she teaches fine arts. She has a master's in fine arts. And she taught a ceramics course and had a lot of non-art students come into her ceramics course. She had a lot of business majors, a lot of people from outside the arts. and they had a gallery show of the ceramics. Unbelievable. It was unbelievable. I walked into that show and I was blown away by the first of all, the creativity, the artistic prowess. There was some just beautiful pieces, and it was shocking to see people that weren't studying fine arts take their hand at ceramics and the thought put into these things. I mean, they were great ceramics pieces, but they were so the cognitive thinking that went into a lot of these pieces blew me away. It was an incredible, I mean, everybody, the dean of the college came and saw it and said, this is it was amazing. And the person that was most surprised by it was Elizabeth. And it was interesting to me that you had non-art students go in and create all this work. And I thought, this is crazy. And it just goes to show you that the human animal does not live by one thing alone. I mean, not just bread, but intellectual stimulation comes from all quarters. And I think one of the things that, look, everyone's talking about our black mirrors that we carry everywhere has become the great narcotic. And maybe that's the undoing, the ultimate example of control. And everybody's getting their dopamine hits and all of that. But unfortunately, as much as I love cinema, if all we're getting is input from screens, what we're not getting is the underlying understanding of what those screens are showing us. I mean, hell, man, people these days don't even know geography. One of the funny things that I've seen lately is people who are talking about the conflict in the Middle East between the Palestinians and the Israelis when they actually see. I've talked to so many people that don't have any inkling of what the size is that they're talking about, what Gaza is compared to Israel and what Israel is compared to the Middle East. If you talk to people that don't know that, they're freeing Palestine, but they have no idea what they're actually freeing. To watch people actually go look and contextualize where these countries are in relation to the Islamic conquest that happened, in the 7th century, and contextualize all of it, it's mind-blowing. Yet these people are going out into the streets and screaming and yelling about things that they don't know much about. I think everybody doesn't want innocent people to die, especially women and children. But there's no context there, so people don't understand. Darth Plato, it's funny about his letter. That was the second draft of the letter he sent me about House of Dynamite. I was randomly listening to NPR, and they were talking about, I came in halfway through some show, I don't even know what it was, but it was talking about World War I. And it was talking, the guy who was speaking was talking about how all the nations in Europe were just arming up, like they were building their armies, and with all this new technology, and everybody was all excited about it, and it was almost inevitable that this war was going to break out. And I don't think I'd ever heard it quite put that way. But after then I read Darth Plato's letter, which touched on the same thing. Because I had listened to that show a couple weeks ago, I suddenly had context and I knew exactly what he meant in his letter. And, for us film fans, one of the great examples of that is Laurie Walters' character in Repo Man. If you've never seen Alex Cox's 1984 Repo Man, first of all, shame on you. It's a punk rock science fiction movie about the LA punk scene, but it's also a satire. But in it, well, you know what? I'll let you decide. Look, you can go to YouTube and you can watch Repo Man plate a shrimp scene, and you'll know what it is. I mean, you should see it in the context of the film because it's much more enjoyable that way. But now that's another thing. You can go watch little cut scenes from movies and not get the context in the larger scheme of things. But hey, you never know. So anyway, but that's Fearless Wolf. What you asked is, we learn storytelling from life, and reading is a big part of that. Storytelling, literature is something that the Gutenberg Bible brought that, or the printing press. When the Gutenberg Bible came and everybody could read it, it freed people from the tyranny of the men of the cloth, because people could read Bibles and make up their own minds. So that was a big, powerful thing. And when people aren't doing that anymore, they lose the power. Billy D. Shillem says, the Gimp is sleeping. Yes. Thomas Logan says, Marty Supreme is a masterpiece. I can't wait to see Marty Supreme. Dying to see it. Josh Safdie delivered one of the greatest coming-of-age stories ever. Timmy wins Best Actor in March. Timothée, actually. No contest. 10 out of 10. I have to say, real Thomas Logan, I think you and I will be parking our shuttles in the same shuttle bay with that one. It looks incredible. You can tell just from the trailer that was released that it's one of the greatest movies of the 21st century. You can just tell. You can just tell. Anyway, there is another article that I wanted to read that also hammers home the idea of cinema as language, and then I've got more letters to read. So, here we go. This came from Medium that, why have I been doing that? Why have I been, I set all this stuff up beforehand, and I've been ruining it. Peter Markham wrote this on June 1st, 2021. And again, this came from the Babel section of Medium, and I wanted to read it. I'm sure that the painter is not a bit interested in the apples for themselves alone, but in the technique of his work, which stimulates the emotion of the viewer of his picture. After all art is experience. People look at an abstract and say, I hate it. But the mere fact that they use the word hate means that they're going through an experience, and therefore, if you apply those principles to film as I see it, it is not the pure manner of the content. In other words, it is not just the story, but what you do with it. Alfred Hitchcock said that in 1964 in an interview for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So much of what critics write about films might just as well be written about novels, short stories, plays, or simply a story they've heard. Critics invariably offer a synopsis, thoughts on the story and the characters, and on what works and what doesn't in the narrative. There might be comparisons with other current movies, references to the filmmaker's past works, and rarely some sense of cultural context. But in general, it's the synoptic take that dominates. What seems rare is any measure of analysis, at least in all but the most cursory detail, of a film's cinematic language, and how that might be understood as an integral part of what the movie is, and of the effect it has on us emotionally, cognitively, neurally, and viscerally. How, indeed, the film could not exist without it, or if it does, how such visual indifference diminishes the movie. If Marshall McLuhan once said the medium is the message, many critics seem to be saying the medium is irrelevant, or the medium as a tool for communication is interchangeable with any other medium for communication, be it the stage, the page, even human speech. Surely this is to deny the distinctive nature of the screen and its multifunctional richness, just as it ignores the specific resources of those other forms of communication. Another aspect of how film is discussed, often by filmmakers themselves, is the conflation of the elements of the screen with those on the page. For example, I recently came across Francis Ford Coppola postulating that the screen's equivalent of the sentence is the shot. For the moment, accepting his observation, how about turning it on its head? Why not say that the prose equivalent of the shot is the sentence? Why give the page primacy over the screen? Why should the screen be seen as subservient, the junior to the adult? But allow me to question his insight. How do the individual clauses of a sentence correlate with what comprises a shot? With its static frames, its moving frames, with its shifting angles one after the other? What does the punctuation within a sentence correlate on the screen? What do its words correlate with, or the letters of those words? The sentence's tense, its idiom. And how about what happens when two shots are cut together? Is this the same as when one sentence follows another? Martin Scorsese, Coppola contemporary and fellow luminary in the pantheon of American masters, says that when two shots come together, a phantom image is created. Not one up there on the screen, but some fleeting, indefinable picture on what I like to call the screen of the mind. Does that happen with two sentences on the page? Maybe sometimes. A man crossed the road through speeding traffic. The ambulance wasn't long in arriving. But here we have an ellipsis. The conjoined shots don't necessarily need an ellipsis. They may elide time and space, but also may extend them. I'm not seeing too many convincing parallels. Rhythm, yes. Length, yes. Simple to complex, okay. Function, maybe. But this brings me to my next point. What both shot and sentence do have in common is that they are each what I choose to refer to as a narrative unit. Perhaps broadly speaking, I'm agreeing with Coppola after all. A paragraph is also such a unit, as is a chapter, a book, or part within a book. A scene, sequence, an act in a film, or as I prefer to say, a movement, a vignette. Also a sequence of parallel action. All of these might be regarded as narrative units. Forgive me for questioning the words of the filmmaker whose The Godfather tops so many lists of greatest masterpieces, whose Apocalypse Now reaches such dazzling visionary heights and plumbs such terrifying epic depths, and whose The Conversation conjures maybe the most chilling paranoia in the history of movies. I've experienced some of the most powerful cinema I know in the hands of this master. But his sentence-shot equivalence doesn't actually seem to tell us too much, which is perhaps why he doesn't elaborate, doesn't follow up with any implications. Another prose screen claimed equivalence is the notion of film grammar. But just as writing a novel is not a question of writing decorous grammar, so making a film is not about good grammatical behavior. In both cases, it is language, not grammar, that matters. It is through language that a story is told. Language that may be indecorous, innovative, individual, and an element of a movie's distinctive subculture. Above all, the language of a story might be heretical, a million miles from grammar, with its intimations of prescribed form, correctness, and good behavior. For much of my time working in production, as a first AD, then initially as a director, I'd be thinking of establishing shots, matching sizes, matching angles such as profile, to follow profile, for example, a template of coverage into which to force the shooting, the results of which could be assembled in the cutting room, establishing shot first, going tighter through the scene perhaps with a new wide at some point to give breadth and punctuation, and a new angle on the action. No. The filmmaker's task is not to behave grammatically, but to capture fictional events by the most effective means by which they may be conveyed to the viewer, prompting engagement, emotion, realization. Ari Aster, once my student, as I ever remain his, one day mentioned to me Nabokov's term ecstatic prose. Okay, here I'm doing exactly what I was criticizing Francis Ford Coppola for. I'm correlating prose with film discourse. But forgive me for arguing that the notion of corresponding ecstatic screen seems bolder, less dry, and more illuminating as a comparison. It gives a sense of style and language, of jubilant energy. The heady opening sequence of Romain Gavras' Athena achieves exactly that ecstasy. Terrifying, yes, but exhilarating instant upon hyper-dynamic instant. The screen can, by contrast, also be uninflected, unassuming, and of course it can be tightly controlled, deliberate. It can proclaim its design, Terence Davies, Paul Schrader, celebrate it, Martin Scorsese, conceal it, Andrea Arnold, exemplify it, Charlotte Wells. No, it's not grammar that matters, that makes for the language of the screen, it's aesthetics, and not as a veneer of either elegance or grittiness, but as a practical resource of the visual utterances that form its discourse. Composition, framing, angle, line, space, proportion, light and tone, color, depth, movement, mise-en-scène, flow of energy or visual rhythm, The screen elements I like to call iconos, from the Greek word for an image, icona. No correlation to the sentence here. Look at the iconos. Is it iconos? I think I'm saying it wrong, but okay. Look at the iconos in that screenshot from Hitchcock's Vertigo. That's this. There it is. The screenshot from Vertigo. What a shot, too, by the way. Look at the iconos in that screenshot from Hitchcock's Vertigo. The left to right, up and down, broad to pointed, oppressive, even threatening diagonal of the Golden Gate Bridge. The dark slash it forms, its vector, its energy. The sensuous deep red of the stanchions. The silhouetted female figure to lower and less stable screen right, helpless at the mercy of that menacing dark diagonal. The slim horizontal tenebrous silver of the quayside in the foreground on which she stands. The broad horizontal space afforded by the stretch of open water, the distant hills that together with the sweep of the bridge form a thrusting shape traveling behind the figure and across to the far right of the frame. The low horizon and the space it creates for bridge and cloud-laden blue sky, its contrasting patches of brightness and shadow, perhaps threatening some imminent storm. How different the sentence or sentences describing this frame would be. How differently the reader would process the words of the writer from the way they process the filmmaker's image. And how different the effect. Seeing the frame, the impact is almost immediate. Reading the lines, more cumulative, the prose would have to be more considered, while the picture works on the viewer more primally. That's one aspect of a movie's address, of course. There's sound, too. There's music. There are the connections between one shot and another, one image and another, not necessarily following on, but later in a film, too. The echoes, the contrasts. There's dramatic context, as there might equally be on the page. There's camera and its stasis or movement, its placement, angle, its lensing. There's what is shown and what isn't, what's in the frame or out. Vertigo is my favorite film. When I think of it, I think not only of its story, its myth of obsession with some delusional, fixed, cold, lifeless ideal. I feel not only its foreboding melancholy, a resonance of the human psyche, for me at least, but I recall its hallucinatory images and the visual texture of Robert Burke's elegant, effulgent cinematography. I see it playing out on the screen, and on the screen of my mind, which is where we remember movies. I see its language, its life, its cinema. I don't see it as a novel or a play. I see it as a movie, a film. I cannot see its story without its storytelling. And that was written by Peter Markham in June 2024. And the author has the book, The Art of the Filmmaker, The Practical Aesthetics of the Screen, that Oxford University Press put out. And then What's the Story? The Director Meets Their Screenplay. I quite enjoyed that article. Hope you did too. So thank you, Peter Markham. But again, I feel also that these days, especially in the YouTube space, I feel that cinema, we've talked about this before. When Martin Scorsese came out and talked about the fact that superhero movies were not cinema, and a lot of people objected, a lot of people got their hackles up and were angry. But what I think Martin Scorsese was saying is that people like stories about certain things, like, for instance, superheroes. We like superheroes in animated shows. We like superheroes in actual comic books. We certainly like superheroes on the big screen when they're in great movies. But I think it's not so much the medium as it is superheroes. We like superheroes. And the best way to see superheroes writ large on the big screen when they're done really well, because up until recently, especially in cinema history, it's only in like the last 25% of cinema history we were able to have superheroes convincingly portrayed on the screen since the dawn of cinema. And I understand why people like that. But I think in the YouTube imagination connoisseur space, it's people don't like so much cinema as they like stories about certain characters presented cinematically. Because I don't hear a lot of people talking about Last Year at Marienbad, which is a movie I've seen both on the big screen and on home video, and it's a movie that I have been perplexed by and delighted by since I first saw it. You can get it. Kino Lorber put out a version of it in 4K. I took a date to it back in 2014. I think she actually kind of liked it because she now deals with photography at Christie's auction house. But it's a movie that I don't hear anybody talk about ever. You know, there's the cinema of the look, which is where Luc Besson came out of. And that cinema of the look sort of began in France in the very early 80s. And I was able to acquire recently a 4K transfer, a 4K disc of Jean-Jacques Bonnet's, or Bonnet's, I don't know how to pronounce, I don't speak French. Is it Bonnet's? His first film, Diva. He went on to make movies like Moon in the Gutter and, of course, the seminal Betty Blue. Big fan of his, but I remember seeing Diva. And it was a film that was literally the cinema of look, the cinema of cool. Luc Besson's Subway, that stars Christopher Lambert, starred in that. They actually make a pretty interesting double feature. If you haven't seen Diva and Subway, give them a whirl. Why not? If you can, see Diva on 4K, because boy, does that transfer look fantastic. But all these movies that I grew up watching that were really impactful to me, and I saw them in the theater and had them on home video and watched them over and over again, most people don't talk about these days. And I understand, like I always said, pop culture has a half-life of 20 years. Most people are only immersed in the pop culture of their own lives, and why shouldn't they be? But what I would say is, if you enjoy... It's one thing to read books. Again, people might not enjoy reading, but they'll read Harry Potter or they'll read The Hunger Games, which I totally understand. I don't understand being a fan of science fiction, fantasy, and horror and not having read. Because so much of the great stories, like if I was who I was and I was 12 years old today and I saw Dune, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, the first thing I would do after the movie was over would be running to the bookstore and getting the book Dune and reading it. I don't know how many people do that. I'm sure some do, but I don't think it's as many as used to, which is too bad because the 6 Frank Herbert Dune books are quite the adventure. I'm still thinking about God Emperor of Dune, believe it or not, which... The Dune books had already mostly come out when I was a young whippersnapper, so the time I finally read Dune was, I think I was 11 or 12 when I got it from the Science Fiction Book Club. But I was there. I got to go to the bookstore when God Emperor of Dune came out, and boy, was that a day, let me tell you. And, you know, it was just as exciting as any movie. I'm like, this is some weird-ass shit. Trying to grasp what was going on. It was wild, man, and I felt like, oh... I've taken my first step into a larger fucking world. You got that right. And then, of course, there's Heretics and Chapter House. But if you want an experience, read all, even if you've seen Denis Villeneuve's movies, read the 6. You don't have to read any of the other books. Sorry, Brian, and sorry, Kevin, but you don't really. Dune, let's face it, you both know it. Dune is really Frank Herbert. And by the way, I highly recommend, whether you like Star Trek the Motion Picture or not, Gene Roddenberry's novelization of Star Trek the Motion Picture, which he actually wrote, is uncut Gene Roddenberry. It is fucking wild. If you think you know everything you know about Star Trek the Motion Picture, oh, I beg to differ. Just give the novelization of Star Trek the Motion Picture a whirl. Because, oh, wow. Anyway, you know, I guess just what I was thinking about was that I started the show thinking about my God. You know, I learned about Modesty Maltese, taught me more things about the Godfather in a 20-minute conversation than I'd thought about in a long time. I thought I knew everything. I thought I was done thinking about the Godfather, which is silly because once I remember hearing, you should never think you know everything about a subject because that means you'll stop thinking about it. You'll memory hole it somewhere, and there's always something new to learn, especially if you're looking out for it. If you don't look out for it, how do you know when you stumble across something like this conversation we had about the Godfather? Who is the Godfather in Godfather 3? I have to say, when she asked me that blew my fucking mind. Anyway, maybe not yours, but it did for me. So I want to read kind couple more letters that I have pulled out here. And let's see what I can find. Yeah, I got that one. I'll read that one. Hang on. I'm just trying to find them all, the ones that I pulled. Well, I know this is not scintillating YouTube. I thought I had it all. Here we go. I found the one I wanted to read. This comes to us from James, Fearless Wolf. Hi, Rob. I just wanted to give you an update after our Zoom chat the other night. We were talking about how different eras use their own media to explore the same deep human questions. Freedom, oppression, hope, and what it even means to be human. That's what brought Beethoven into it. In my course, I just learned how, after the French Revolution, he used opera to dig into those same themes in his own time. The Prisoner's Chorus in Fidelio really struck me. People crushed by authority suddenly getting a moment of light and dignity again. So the comparison made perfect sense. Beethoven used opera to ask those questions then, and Star Trek uses science fiction to ask them now. Different tools, same purpose. I ended up using that whole connection in my university forum answer, and this is what I wrote. My view of Beethoven's music has definitely changed this week. I was talking to a friend who has worked in Hollywood and on Star Trek, and he didn't realize how much Beethoven's approach shaped modern media. The Prisoner's Chorus in Fidelio was the moment that hit me. It isn't just classical music, it's using the medium to carry meaning, emotion, politics, humanity, the same way that films, TV, and games use their formats today. I never understood that Beethoven was basically doing what modern creators do now, using his medium to express the deepest human ideas, even the soul. Your comment on Zoom actually helped me shape that, because you made the Star Trek connection click in a way the course materials never fully managed. So this is just me saying thanks. Leave it to you to drop one thought in passing and end up improving my university work. That's about the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. I thought I should at least let you know, especially in that effortlessly handsome way you somehow pull off. Oh, James. James, thank you. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate you saying so. I mean, look, I mean, as an imagination connoisseur, one of the great things about life is living in a world that I was born into that had so much of these things that I love. You know, the idea that films and television and music and fashion and all the cool stuff that we have, that's why it's so frustrating to watch our world stagnate under tribalism and under identity politics and under politics and the forces of, you know, I feel like maybe we've always had that push-pull, but I think the great thing about imagination and the great thing about art is it is inherently sure, you can have art that talks about the bad things in life as much as the good things in life, but that's the continuum of existence. But I think the great thing about art, or the endeavors of the imagination, telling stories, I mean, what is a story but you are conjuring up emotion and feeling and narrative, conjuring it up out of nothingness. You're just making shit up. You're using your imagination and your intellect and your thoughts. And that's why, whether you're an artist, you're making a comic book, you're making an album, recorded, music, you're conjuring something out of nothing that has an effect, a psychological effect on other human beings. And that's amazing. That's truly amazing. And I think that's what look, I mean, I've always believed that the purpose of humanity, why are we here? We are here to know the universe. The universe cannot recognize itself. And in knowing our universe and our little corner that we exist on in this hermetically sealed ball that we live on, our job is to convey the wonder of existence to one another. And unfortunately, so much of our existence is hell-bent on getting rid of one another, which is too bad. But I was lucky to fall into the artistic side of things, so my experience was a little bit more positive. But I want to thank you for writing in, and I'm glad that I got to see you, meet you for the first time. James was somebody I had not met before, and he came into the member chat. Michael Koshiski says, "Hi, I watched your show Robservations for the first." This is written on November 19th. "Hi, I watched your show Robservations for the first time via YouTube tonight. It's so good and informative. You answered questions I've been thinking about for years while seeing those miscellaneous headlines in the trades. Looking forward to getting in and catching up on your shows. Thoughtful and unhurried, intelligent discourse. Hooray! Sorry it's taken so long. I agreed with your takes on Trek novel authors as well, like David Mack. I also enjoyed Dayton Ward. I enjoyed Dayton Ward as well." And that comes from Michael Koshiski. I hope I got it, Koshiski. Well, Michael, what a very nice letter, and thanks for taking the time to even put pen or keyboard, I guess it's not pen to paper, keyboard to internet. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. This one comes from someone else who is in the member chat, Robert Coleman. "Hey, Rob, it's great chatting with you on the member chat. As always, it was a blast. One topic that we were discussing was the old-time movie serials and how films like Predator Badlands and Kong Skull Island would be at home in the pulp movie serials of that day. I wanted to follow up on the topic about the man who is often considered the king of movie serials, William Whitney. A specialist in outdoor action and stunt direction, Whitney directed or co-directed 23 of Republic's best-known serials between 1937 and 1946, including The Lone Ranger, Spy Smasher, Perils of Nyoka, Drums of Fu Manchu, The Adventures of Captain Marvel, one of the great early superhero stories on the big screen, Zorro's Fighting Legion, and Dick Tracy versus Crime Incorporated. Max Allan Collins will be happy with that. Whitney also directed 26 Roy Rogers movies from 1946 to 1951, and which are considered the best of the Rogers films because Whitney downplayed the musical elements in favor of more serious storylines and rough-and-tumble action set pieces. Quentin Tarantino has often stated that Whitney was ahead of everybody else working in B pictures of the era in terms of action choreography. In an article published in 2000 from the Quentin Tarantino archives, Tarantino said this: "He's a visual stylist, but he's a visual stylist in the way that a lot of those guys were back then," Mr. Tarantino says. "It's always about moving the camera like, 'Hey, Mom, look, I'm directing.' He was clever about camera movement. One of the things I got from looking at his films is that the camera movements are so elegant. You have to have made movies for 30 years to be able to move the camera so unpretentiously. His camera movements, when they happen, are so cool. They're either completely artful in a cool, don't call attention to yourself kind of a way, or they're visually about how to tell the story. These guys were storytellers. They knew how to move the camera to convey information so they didn't have to shoot another dialogue scene to explain something. Tarantino has called him one of the greatest action directors in the history of the business." Whitney said he learned about choreography after watching dance choreographer turned director Busby Berkeley rehearse a dance number for one of his Warner Brothers musicals, and then watched Berkeley film a sequence involving 40 dancers. Whitney teamed with director John English for several of Republic's most successful and best remembered serials, devising the modern system of filming movie fight sequences. Instead of filming a crowd of people wildly throwing punches at each other as in a barroom brawl, Whitney broke the action down into separate, carefully choreographed shots, which he patterned after the dance sequence in a Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers musical. Whitney was a pioneer who has been largely neglected and whose works should be rediscovered, especially by action enthusiasts who enjoy seeing action being played out within the frame, an art that has sadly been usurped by shaky cam. Ugh, you're right. There are some young directors out there like Chad Stileski of the John Wick films or Brad Bird who honor the art of the action set piece with creative choreography, and we still have the old masters like George Miller with his Mad Max Fury Road and Furiosa films reminding the young guns how to do it right. But let's not forget a neglected master who deserves to be mentioned with the best of them, William Whitney. Thanks, Rob, and rock on, brother. Absolutely, sir. I mean, Robert, thanks for writing that in. I mean, it was really interesting that you brought up Whitney, and we got to talk a little bit about the Adventures of Captain Marvel. You know, people always ask me what's one of my favorite superhero movies, and even though that's a serial, The Adventures of Captain Marvel will always be one of my favorite movies and serials, because it is. I saw it early on, and I owned it on Laserdisc. For those of you, it's Captain Marvel, it's Shazam, the actual original Captain Marvel. And it's a great serial. Whitney directed it. And if you've never seen The Adventures of Captain Marvel serial, seek it out. It's probably on YouTube. And again, how to watch something. When you're watching an actual 40s serial, which is where Predator Badlands and Raiders of the Lost Ark, I'm not comparing the two, but they both have their feet firmly in the action serials of the 30s and 40s. When you go back and watch them, you're going to have to acclimate. You're going to have to sit yourself down and think, okay, before I watch this, I'm going to think to myself, okay, this was made in the 1940s. It's not going to present things the way I'm used to. But if you go into it that way and try and remember what this was like for the people seeing it at the time, I think you'll really enjoy The Adventures of Captain Marvel. It's really, 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 really good. So Thomas Logan said, Laserbeam Hawkins celebrates 20 months of being a member of the channel. Well, I thank you for that, Laserbeam Hawkins. That's very nice of you. And so thanks. I appreciate that. Let me catch up with everything else I've been missing out on here. There's a few more. I think that's enough letters. I think I've read enough for everyone tonight. I've said my piece. I've said what I wanted to say. Let me just check and see if anyone's thrown in any extra tips my way. And I want to make sure I don't miss any. Sometimes that happens. Nope, I think I've got everything. And I like that there was somebody named It Is Us Rob tonight. That sounds kind of ominous. It sounds like I'm in Pluribus. By the way, if you haven't seen Pluribus, 4 episodes in, what a great show. What a fun show. And I can't believe how many YouTube videos are being made about Pluribus with their theories. It's so much fun. It's great. I love seeing Vince Gilligan make everybody excited. Again, I gotta mention something else. I watched All Her Fault on Peacock. I saw somebody put out this video. It was so funny. It was this black dude, and he was like, "Don't watch this. Don't watch it. You'll get sucked in." Of course, that is an invitation to the dance. So I hadn't even upgraded. I know I was paying for Peacock, but I can't remember the last thing I watched on Peacock. Probably Teacup. James Wan's Teacup. Once I found out it was an adaptation of Robert McCammon's book Stinger. I mean, really? I think that was the last thing that I watched was Teacup. But then I watched this thing, and again, I watched it all in one sitting. All Her Fault. Now, with Sarah Snook from Succession. Now, here's the thing. I really enjoyed All Her Fault. It is an airplane read at best. It's not going to change your life. However, I will say this. Like the guy said on his little Instagram video, it is like taking your first snort of really good blow. You're in, and you want another bump, please, another fatty rail right there. They opened it in such a compelling way that I'm like, ugh. I mean, it's not mind blowing or anything like that, but you can't not watch. You can't not watch. It's only 8 episodes. It's on Peacock. All Her Fault. Good performances. It actually did surprise me. Don't read anything about it, though. There's a lot of twists and turns. And look, it's not going to change your life. And if you've been watching the Harlan Corbin adaptations on Netflix, you'll probably guess all the changes or whatever. But All Her Fault, check it out. I watched till 4 this morning. But anyway, check it out if you want to, if you like that kind of thing. And again, I'm not saying it's high art. It's a B movie broken into 8 chapters, but it was good. Sarah Snook was great. I'll watch her on anything. If you have not seen Predestination with Handsome Hawk with Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook, why haven't you? The Spirig Brothers wrote it, the same guys who made Daybreakers. If you want to see something, I've said it on the show before, watch Predestination, but don't, again, go in cold. If you go in cold, it's pretty awesome. And it's a adaptation of a short Robert Heinlein story called All You Zombies. Don't read the story either, but watch Predestination. You can guess what it might be dealing with, but if you don't know about it and you've never heard of it, go find it and watch Predestination and get back to me. It's a wacky bit of fun, I'll tell you that. And on that note, I want to thank everybody for being here. Thomas Logan's probably right about Marty Supreme. I can't wait to see it. And yeah, so I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via Super Chats and tips. And members, thank you very much. It was great to see you all. Work is still going on the perks for the Blu-ray, or the Blu-ray, the soundtrack album, the script book. All the perks for True Noir are in process. I'm trying to finish them as soon as I can. And yes, we have sold True Noir for distribution, so it's going to be everywhere. If you haven't listened to it yet, you'll be able to find it wherever you hear your podcasts. And I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson and the moderating staff for being such good sports. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I promise I will be back tomorrow.